I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kutin.
This is Consider This. Tomorrow, Tuesday, 10th of December, is International Human Rights Day. And Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "Where do human rights begin? In places so small, so close to home, that they cannot be seen in any map of the world." So joining us on the show tonight, we have Gerald Joseph, one of the commissioners of the National Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, better known as SUHAKAM, to tell us a little bit more about human rights that should be close to home. Welcome, Gerald, to the show. Now, can we talk a little bit about where Malaysia stands when it comes to the human rights benchmark? I mean, has there been successes so far this year that you've seen?
It's a big question. The list is long, and the demand of human rights, as you mentioned rightfully, it's in the places where we don't see. And that could be the villages where water is lacking, could be the kampungs where the land rights of indigenous are still not existing. It could be in very informal settlements where people without documents struggle to live their life for fear of being arrested, not because it could also be children who just did not get the documents and they suffer multiple layers of difficulty from a rights point, education, health. It could also be behind bars, which public doesn't see, conditions of prison, lock-up detention, investigation methods, cabbies, the list. So it's in all places, right up to you and I, having the confidence that society is safe, that we can walk out of this building and know that we won't be arrested arbitrarily because we have rights, or we will not be pickpocketed because the security is taken care of. So the range is so wide.
Right.
And even if you don't do anything and if you still feel discriminatory practices exist in Malaysia, I feel like, oh, if I apply for that job, surely I won't get it because I'm of a certain ethnic group or a religion. I mean, that already speaks to human rights. So the list is long, and your question is how many of this tick box, I would say we're moving forward.
Well, okay, so let me refine that question a little bit better. Are we moving in the right direction?
Yeah.
Has there been progress in achieving this?
Yeah. So just those examples I gave you, there is, because there is some earnestness in trying to reform the Akta Orang Asli, for example, because there's a big problem of the land rights of indigenous people.
Sure.
There is a discussion to improve how the Department of Orang Asli works with indigenous people, because they've heard all the complaints, So I think there's a responsiveness that are indicative that things are moving. There is improvement in the lockups. For the first time, there's good news. Congrats to the Malaysian government. SUHAKAM has been pushing to have medical doctors at lockups before people go in, before we get detained, which is part of the suspicion of deaths in custody or torture. So there'll be 5 centralized lockup which will have a medical team to screen them. So this is a progress.
Okay.
Yeah, and then also, I don't know whether Malaysians know, but there are 6 prisons in Malaysia still have a very old toilet system called the bucket system, which our great-grandparents used to do.
The bucket system?
Bucket system. Where
Still exists in Malaysian prisons?
Yeah. 6 prisons have that. One is because very old, and there's no modern toilet.
There's no modern plumbing in 6 prisons in Malaysia. That is extraordinary.
Okay, I mean, moving from toilets to parliament, let's...
It's a big jump, is it? Oh, not
well,
so big.
maybe
A small step.
Depending on the day of parliament, I think. Another extraordinary feat was, for the first time, the SUHAKAM report was debated in parliament, something that SUHAKAM has wanted for the longest time, and it's only this year that this was achieved. Now, you were there in parliament. Gerald, tell us a bit about the quality of the discussion around the SUHAKAM report.
Because we were shocked. I mean, we waited. Every year we keep asking, nothing happened. It's tabled. It's been tabled, meaning it's put on the table the previous years. First time the Minister, VK Liu, and the government put it on debate. So we're not sure what to expect. But amazing, I thought that the 12 MPs that took the floor from both sides, 6 and 6, were good. It was like a book they could pick any issue of concern. And MPs started debating substance of the matter. So we had a range from defense of the need for the independence of SUHAKAM, increased budget, if not they can't work, because our commissioners, this was mentioned yesterday, you know, there's been no review of the terms for commissioners the last 20 years. So we are like 3 times lower than other commission. The cars are 15 years old, so may break down any time when I was coming here. But the point being that they should be adequately funded. 2 serious issues in their constituencies, so citizenship, statelessness, migrant workers, children, sexually abused children, the system of court. So they went into deep substance, asking government answers using our report, you know.
Okay.
There was also 1 or 2 MPs who disagreed with some of the things we said, mainly on LGBT, on how we phrased it, which we will take it on board. But these are the differentiation between the position of an independent commission, which reviews and views matters from a human rights lens and will say it as it is, and the government may have a different view from us. So
help us put this into context. The SUHAKAM report is essentially a report on the state of human rights in Malaysia, right? And SUHAKAM gives recommendations to the government how to improve the state of human rights. Has any of the recommendations been taken up by not just this government, but the previous government?
So, like the example I gave you of the centralized custodial medical units, that's an example.
Oh, so it has been, some of them has been. What about the Barisan National Government? Have they taken up any of the recommendations
They do. So,
before?
sometimes in the localized areas, if there is a complaint and we inform them, some action is taken at the localized line. A police officer did some disciplinary action or something wrong or torture, it gets to the disciplinary board. But at the policy level, much less, and that's where sometimes I feel that the recommendation has been noted with reverence, but not escalated to action, you know.
It's like noted with thanks.
Okay, the question is why, right? Is it because broadly there isn't a sufficient understanding of rights as a kind of discourse, right? Rights as a kind of way of thinking about governance. Because governance always seems to be in the provision of certain services, and they might actually, in some ways, be congruent with the rights perspective. But rights suggest something more than just that your MP happened to, or the government happened to give allocation for this and that, right? So, is that an understanding? Is there a rights perspective, broadly speaking, within the Assembly?
I was pleasantly surprised that they picked up rights understanding, they critique from a rights point of view, they articulated. And the better part yesterday was they used a SUHAKAM report, and there's also another report given to each MP called Maklum Balas. The official reply from every ministry of our report was also put in that. So they actually read through and they had some criticism of the answers of the government.
Oh,
why is this
wow.
so, which is, I think, going to push the government to give better answers, government agencies. You know, every year we get that, but it's sort of sometimes quite standard answers, and we expect it to move more. But the background of it is human rights is a tough sell in Malaysia, especially to government, because rights means you can demand some things that government feels like it's in their purview. Who are you to demand? But that's what human rights is, you know. It's in the places where it resides. Actually, it resides in our hearts, you know, from the day we were born. So I think many governments, the previous government, shied away from rights. They gave some cursory attention, but not substantive attention. This government has put it on paper in their manifesto, like it's almost a rights, you know, freedom, democracy. But now the challenge is, how do you realize these things, like the bills, you know, the coming up of many bills. The National Inquiry Report on Indigenous People that was done in 2013. It's a good report with 18 recommendations. The previous government accepted 17 and set up a cabinet committee, but then no real follow through.
Right.
But now the new government, we are trying to find where is that located, and we still haven't found the location of where.
Of whose purview this is?
Yeah, who,
Right.
right. So there's some gap. So I think these are the real follow through, because if you want to make human rights work, then it's in the nuts and bolts.
It's in the implementation of
Yeah,
that. We'll come back and continue this discussion, especially on SUHAKAM's role in human rights as a tough sell in Malaysia. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad on the show with you, and we're speaking to one of the SUHAKAM commissioners, Gerald Joseph. Tomorrow is International Human Rights Day, taking stock of where Malaysia is at in terms of human rights. Now, just before the break, you said it's a tough sell here in Malaysia. I want to talk about SUHAKAM's role. Whether there's a clear understanding of SUHAKAM's role. There's a misconception. Is it part of the government? Is it an NGO? I understand it's established by Parliament under the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia Act. So maybe you can clarify some of these misconceptions for us.
So I think the misconception continues. Sometimes they invite us as a list of NGOs. So even governments do that. So you say, why are we in the CEC of the NGO? Then we tell at the meeting, you say, oh yeah, sorry, noted. We are a statutory body. But statutory bodies, there are so many statutory bodies that are actually government agencies. But the correct definition which we would like to use is a state institution, an independent state institution. So like you have judiciary, they are created by acts, constitution, money comes from the government of the day, but they are independent. So a state institution which is independent, powered by the act of parliament, and that's how we do. But in reality, in our previous history, many people still criticize us for being like NGO. Why are you all criticizing government?
So as an independent state institution, are you an advisory body? Do you have any enforcement powers?
We don't have enforcement, but we have investigative powers.
Investigative powers.
So complaints are a big part of people. Last year we got about 1,200 complaints on human rights issues. So through that, then we use to summon people to go and call people in to investigate to find out. But we have no enforcement, so we have to recommend the next action, so to the relevant agencies or to the Attorney General. And then the other big part is policy advice, law advice on government. So we always intervene to tell government, keep up the good work, it has to be comply in line, like the IPCMC, to improve it better. And when the recent delay, so we came out with a statement saying why the delay, we think it should be long overdue,
Okay, so let's talk about you referenced last week's parliamentary debate on the SUHAKAM report. One of the things was a discussion about how SUHAKAM is funded. We know under the Najib administration, SUHAKAM suffered funding cuts. And this, of course, means that you can't do all the work that you want to do. The kind of arbitrariness of funding and the control that government has over funding. I mean, Azalina Othman Said from UMNO, interestingly enough, had some concrete suggestions about how government might fund it, but in a way that keeps the independence of the institution.
So as a Human Rights Commission, we are governed by what is called the Paris Principle. There's an international framework to check our independence. Every 5 years, we need to get accreditation. We are A now. Next year, we will be re-accredited. Okay. Funding is an important point because the government is supposed to adequately fund us. But the question that YB Azalina pointed out, which is correct, because in our Act say government funds. It's not, and that funding is very ambiguous because we put in our requests, but we don't get what we need. Right. We get a cut down, and so it's been generally about 10 million every year for the previous many years. Last year, with the new finance minister, 2 million more was added, so it's now 12.45 million or something. But this year we had an additional Children's Rights Commissioner added on to to our complement with a separate office, but we have no additional budget. So I think her proposal is it should not be subject to decision of economical calculation by the government. It should be guaranteed funding, and she asked to change the language of government and put it into the constitution where guaranteed funding, like the judges, you cannot play with that. That is like whatever happens, it's guaranteed. So it was a good proposal to strengthen.
Okay. How likely is the proposal, to be taken up?
Constitutional amendments, government shies away from, but the minister said we will take due consideration of it.
So
but
it's like a double tough sell, right?
Yeah.
Human rights and money.
SUHAKAM actually comes after many long-established human rights organizations have been in existence, right? SUHAKAM recently celebrated its 30th anniversary, and of course we know that Malaysia's always had some form of civil society-driven activism around issues, sometimes articulated in terms of rights. How do you locate SUHAKAM within this larger field of human rights advocacy in the country? And to what extent are there synergies, or is there territoriality and kind of a fighting between them for who gets to represent what issue?
I don't think there is a fight between the human rights institution and civil society. Very clear division, but we've been very collaborative. In the previous government, we were an interlocutor for many civil societies. Our doors are open door policy. So they would come with their complaints, and then we would initiate events, roundtable discussion, which had all stakeholders, because it was the most difficult task before for civil society to have direct access.
Right.
So SUHAKAM played that role, and our meetings, government used to come. It was a good discussion space. And the complaints, many NGOs get the first call, like torture or a village being broken down or something, and then they will bring the people to SUHAKAM, and that's how SUHAKAM gets in. So it's been very collaborative, and civil society is an important stakeholder that SUHAKAM calls upon also to inform us, to help us in our work, because they are the grassroots people in the country.
Okay, so you can kind of have this intermediary role. I kind of want to come back to very quickly the funding of SUHAKAM. Again, with limited budget, you can't look at all human rights issues. I mean, you talked about the range of human rights issues. Is there a priority that you have to allocate funds to? I mean, how do you refine that priority?
It's tough, because if we refine, there will be a group say, discrimination, you've forgotten my issue. So open door means all issues come in, but as a programmatic approach, we've spent a lot of energy on the national inquiry indigenous people in our previous history. Now we're spending a bit more energy on human rights education in schools, to modularize, to try to get the education ministry to work a bit more. Then I think next year, based on the amount of input plus our own discussion, the issue of statelessness, children who are stateless, adults who are stateless, and documentation seems to be a big priority. Many MPs have said that needs to be resolved.
Okay.
So I think that will take up energy of us. But if I put that on the list, it would not be fair, because we continue with trying
Everything
to clear
else,
up the bucket system, which is a good news, because out of 6, 3 have been going to be renewed, going to be changed, the toilet of the 3 prison. 3 not, but there will be continuing work at that level. But at the policy level, we will have to push 2 or 3 big issues. But if we don't do what others call on us, they will then be unhappy with SUHAKAM.
Just very quickly before the break, you mentioned that you're looking at human rights education in schools. Human rights being taught in schools at the moment?
No.
Not at all.
Not
So
at
looking
all.
to increase that.
So there's an interim new measure done, the post-UPR, post-PT3, where the children have a lot of free time, teachers who don't know what to do. So we've introduced modules for 2-3 days and trained about 400 over teachers, and so they've been tried out in schools this year for the first time. We worked with the education ministry, so that's the first step in. Yeah.
Oh,
Wonderful. All
very
right.
impressive.
We'll be right back with more on Consider This. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for staying with us on Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kutan. We're talking to Gerald Joseph, one of the commissioners at the National Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, SUHAKAM, and we're celebrating International Human Rights Day tomorrow, 10th of December. Sharaad, you had a question for Gerald.
Well, until recently, the Parliamentary Select Committee was another innovation in Parliament. It had a vacancy for the human rights component. So I was wondering, I hear we have some good news on the Parliamentary Select Committee. Tell us about it.
It was actually gender and rights in one group. Now it's been split. So the gender is a separate select committee, and there's one called Human Rights and Constitutionality. And the chair, I think, is YB Charles Santiago.
From Klang.
From Klang, yeah.
Wonderful.
So they should work now fully. So there's gender and rights separated.
Right, so that's good news, because it seems that at some point it seemed like the human rights agenda maybe was taking a backseat. There wasn't a priority, because it's taken them a good enough time to actually elect that person to that position. Okay, now that that's done, how do you see all this operating? SUHAKAM Parliament now more actively involved in discussions about human rights, a select committee. What should be the agenda for 2020?
So I think last week in the debate in Parliament, it was reaffirmed that now there is spaces in the select committee, and by the quality of the debate, human rights seems to be of interest even to their local constituency issues. So I think that's the way to start. Parliamentarians must pick up the issues on the ground and bring it up, and one of the best spaces is the select committee, which is their own body. The Commission now stands ready and already started engaging with some of the select committees. We are called in as ex officio to give input, and we want to start submitting issues to keep them updated, not just once a year during the debate, but to ask them to pick up some issues to move forward.
Okay.
So Human Rights Committee will be a great partner, the Gender Committee, bills, consideration of bills, and there's a new committee also on international, I forgot the name, I think it's International Affairs and Trade, by YB Wong Chen. I see also a dimension of international treaty recommendation that I think may have some traction there. So I think SUHAKAM will now be a regular partner. We were before, but now the Parliament's doors are so wide open. I mean, everybody walks in and walks out, which is positive. So I think we will also be a regular partner in Parliament.
So you talked about submitting issues regularly.
Yeah.
What are some of the low-hanging fruit that can be tackled in 2020?
I think this word low-hanging fruit, I personally don't like it.
No, you
but
don't? Okay. All right, why? Because, I'm
because
thinking about easy wins for human rights,
but
right?
normally when we were small, we always used to climb up the tree to pick the fruits of the higher parts. But okay, I get what you say.
The rotten ones at the bottom.
The treaties, I think government is too afraid or too shy to touch it, but I think the Convention Against Torture, we don't want to be one of the few countries that say our value is a torturous or support torture. There's a convention on enforced disappearance. I think these are low-lying fruits.
Okay.
I mean, we don't have institutional ways to disappear people. So these two, I think we should move forward clearly. The laws, the draconian components or draconian laws that the government itself put on the list,
Right.
I think they should just move ahead with it, No law will be perfect when you do amendment or you propose new laws. There will be tweaking, there will be readjustment, but the spirit of that change needs to be done as quick as possible, IPCMC being one. I mean, it's a positive law. I mean, oversight is not bad.
But so here we come back to the real politics of the Malaysia, of the new Malaysia, right? And we've seen Dr. Mahathir at International Forum declaring that he will, sign on to all these remaining treaties and conventions at the UN, and then back home not having the political will to push through with something. So we have had the pushback on the Rome Statute, ISUD, and anyone, even with the IPCMC, the idea that there's vested interests in government, or in the state rather, who are resistant to this idea, and the executive and the government of the day doesn't have the political will to push through against the objections of vested interests. What happens to human rights if the government itself seems to be half-hearted? They say they want to, but they don't seem to be able to demonstrate a will to push through when it's hardest and most challenging.
I think you don't become government to only make popular decisions. You become government because you need to do the right things, and then popularity will grow over time. So like death penalty in Europe was not popular when it was the abolishment. Was not popular. People were against. But today when you go to Europe, you will find very little support for death penalty. Similar to here, you go ahead with the IPCMC because people say, oh, why you're focusing? It's not focusing. It's a regular business. And over time, I'm so confident police abuse will come down. It will be managed.
It takes time,
it'll
right?
take time, but it's not going to be a bad thing. Similar to ISUD and Rome Statute. People won't understand, people will never get the full picture, but the government understands, the government knows what is good for society, and it will propose and open up the first few steps. And that will be then the change that will come, because people say, okay, it's not a bad thing.
Okay, one really important follow-through on that question is the question of bipartisan support, because much of the pushback has come organized from the federal opposition.
Right.
Do you see a change in the way the federal opposition moves on questions of human rights? Are they going to still play the spoiler in order to win political points, or are they going to perhaps shift and see the larger national interests in these issues?
reading from what they did for ISET, for example, it looks like it's a spoiler game plan. But looking at the experience last week in the parliament when the debate happened, it looked like it was substantive debate from both sides of the house. So I think they know what is human rights. They know when they can actually engage human rights for the country. But when the politics of the nation comes in, then upmanship or upwomanship happens, and I think that's dangerous. I think we need to get back to that script and narrative that they have a responsibility, like last week, to be responsible members of parliament, to ask us tough questions and to agree or disagree based on substance. I think there is still that possibility as I witness at parliament, and I'm hoping that will come to the fore. But how you manage this kind of breaking politics where both sides go to the end, it will never come together because that's politics. But then the government of the day cannot use that as an excuse not to move forward, because you were chosen as government to help us realize a new Malaysia, and this part of this list that you just mentioned is the new Malaysia. It's not going to be popular, but give it time, people will understand the benefits of all that is proposed. But if you keep delaying, U-turn, delaying, then rights will be at the mercy of politics.
Yeah, whether they have the will to make those tough decisions, right? Thank you so much, Gerald, for being on the show today. An important conversation to have given International Human Rights Day tomorrow. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad. We're signing off for tonight. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Thank you for watching and good night.